All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the State of Sustainability. We are going to talk today about emerging topics around what's happening in terms of sustainability, where the momentum currently is. If we have our finger on the pulse of sustainability right now, what's it telling us? I've got a great panel here with me today. My name is Stephanie McLarty. I am head of sustainability at Quantum Lifecycle Partners. We are a full service electronics recycler, ITAD, and basically anything to do with electronics, lifecycle solutions company. I'm also co-chair of the ReMA Sustainability Network. And before we get into our panel introducing themselves, just a few housekeeping items. We're going to do questions at the end. We've got a couple microphones here. Also, directly after this, for ReMA members, we're doing a Sustainability Network meetup in the lounge, which is at the end of this hallway by the big windows there in the ReMA members lounge. And that's for anyone who's a ReMA member and is interested in sustainability. Whether you're actually part of our network or not, you're welcome to join. All right. Well, one of the things I get to do at Quantum is host our podcast called The Circular Future. And we have interviews with leaders in terms of what their businesses are doing for circularity. And the first question we always ask is, what are 3 things that we should know about your company? And I thought that's a really nice way to start this off. And so I'm going to let each of you introduce yourself. Nicole, I'm going to start with you. Please introduce yourself. And what would be 3 things that we should know about advanced drainage systems in this case?
Okay. Well, I'm Nicole Voss. I'm the Director of Corporate Sustainability at Advanced Drainage Systems. For those of you who don't know Advanced Drainage Systems, we like to say we manage the life cycle of a raindrop. So we make products that capture, convey, store, treat, and now reuse stormwater. So that's kind of our mission statement. Our tagline is our reason is water. So no better sustainability pitch than in our branding and tagline. And we are one of the largest plastic recyclers in North America. So I joined the company about 5 years ago, and at that point, we were recycling around 500 million pounds of plastic every year. This past year was a struggle. We didn't quite get to that same number, but we still are charging forward towards a goal of recycling 1 billion pounds of plastic every year.
Hi, I'm Kitsie Riggall. I'm a partner at CRI Communications, which is a boutique communications firm based out of Atlanta. We primarily do 2 things. We help companies with sustainability reporting, and we also do consulting and advisory services for all of the sort of adjacent areas that feed into communications and reporting. Our clients come in all shapes and sizes, but they tend to be larger public companies. Caterpillar, Waste Management, Radius is a former client, Clorox, so on and so forth. So a lot of household names, but we also work with a lot of smaller private firms, and I'll get into why I think that's happening later.
Sure. Hi, Eric Potashner, Radius Recycling, responsible for sustainability, government affairs, and communications. So Radius Recycling, we are a metals recycling business. We have 50 operating locations around the country. We do about 5 million tons a year of metal. We also operate 50 pick and pulls around the country, where we're processing a little shy of 700,000 vehicles a year, selling 5 million auto parts for reuse. And then interesting about and we own a steel mill up in Oregon as well, where we sell merchant rebar. Interesting facts about my company. So started as the Alaska Junk Company 120 years ago. Then got renamed by a man named Sam Schnitzer, renamed it to Schnitzer Steel, which we operated for over 118 years as. Then we switched to Radius Recycling. And then this last summer, we got bought by Toyota Tsusho. So it's been an interesting last couple of years.
Yeah, it would be. So I want to start today by talking about the fact, I feel like if this panel were 2, maybe 3 years ago, it would probably be the state of ESG, the state of environmental social governance. But now we're saying sustainability. I think that speaks to this whole landscape has shifted significantly in the last couple of years. So for each of you, and Kitsie, I'm going to start with you. In your view, how has this whole area of sustainability changed and evolved in the last couple of years?
A lot. Yeah, I agree. It might have been an ESG panel, and I still like the term ESG. I think it's a little bit more precise than sustainability. However, most of our clients are shying away from it these days. But we got into sustainability, I want to say about 2008, 2007, 2008. And we're now, 2026, 15 or so years later. And during the majority of that time, sustainability has had a lot of momentum. It's, corporate. You might have started out 15 years ago. The person in charge of sustainability was somebody's assistant. Now you have a full-blown corporate department and function of specialists. The space has gotten much more innovative, much more sophisticated, integrated into the business, so on and so forth. And above all, it's always been a good thing to talk about. It's always, well, who could argue with us being sustainable? Well, it turns out a lot of people can, very publicly. So that momentum has really shifted in the last 2 years, starting in 2023, when you had a lot of gadfly activists out there. And of course, with the change in administrations in 2024, there was another sort of shift, probably more severe. And so I think right now we're in a reset period. I think I was just at a kind of the major sustainability conference in February, and people were pretty shell-shocked. And I think that the space is having to learn how to talk about sustainability topics in entirely new ways. And I think ultimately it'll be better, but definitely a shift.
Yeah. Okay. What about you, Eric?
Yeah. So I'd say there's two things that really drive decision-making for companies like mine, which is it's the market or it's regulatory drivers. And if neither of those two are giving you a signal that sustainability is a top priority, you're probably not going to see much movement or much effort. On the market side, I would say there's a lot of good intention, but at the end of the day, at least what my company does is sell a commodity. And as long as you're meeting the quality standard, then price comes into effect. And no matter what that story is to tell behind your product, it's really not going to get you above that price conversation. So then you get back to regulatory drivers, and it's been sort of stop and start depending on what level of government you're talking about.
Right.
So
okay.
It's been choppy, I guess is what I would say. Yeah.
Nicole?
Yeah, I think, my experience has been the same, right? You see the regulatory drivers and, I've been in this space for long enough that I remember pushing the boulder uphill at the chemical company, 20 years ago, and everybody saying, oh, sustainability, we need goals. So we set goals, and then nobody had them in their objectives. So they didn't really progress forward. And then investors woke up, right? 5 years ago and said, oh, this is important to us. So that kind of gave us a reinvigoration. And that was about the same time that I joined Advanced Drainage Systems, because they realized we don't have anybody doing this, and we have this wonderful story. It's already integrated in so many parts of our business. How do we leverage that? So really, using that, and, like Eric said, the parts of it that are working today, it's where the economics work, right? So if you can't make the economics work on purchasing renewables for energy, you have to figure out a way to get there, right? Maybe you can buy tax credit transfers and use some of the savings from that to pay for renewable energy credits, right? It's how do you get there and make it work for the business? The recycling piece. ADS has been recycling for over 40 years and using recycled material. It's an integrated part of our business, and we buy from over 500 plastic recyclers in North America. But how do you leverage that when the economics don't work, right? I mean, 6 months ago, we were in a different place than we are today. And how do you move that forward? And I think as we continue to see changes in the reporting and the regulations, we're going to continue to see changes. But one thing that remains constant, companies that are committed to it and companies that have sustainability or ESG ingrained in the way they do business, they're not changing the way they do business in this environment. They're moving forward. They're just not talking quite as much about it. 3 years ago, my sustainability topics were front and center in every quarterly investor presentation. The data's still there today, but it's not the first slide. And we even get pushback from some of our investors about why are you even still talking about this, right? So how do we integrate that and move forward? But I will say we have a huge chunk of European investors, and the European investors are still very focused on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say so. We're primarily based in Canada, and we've probably had less change than what I'm hearing here on the stage. Probably also because in electronics, there's that inherent economic case, in comparison to some of the other commodities. We're still seeing from our customers, they're very much interested in it, but you're right. It's not the flashy front page. It's not the current trend. It's coming back to more of the fundamentals. And I've heard about the regulatory changes. And I know in the US, there's been a lot, but let's start there. And Nicole, could you please give us an overview of what has changed in the last couple of years on the regulatory side for sustainability?
Sure. So as you look at it, the SEC proposed rules. We thought they were coming. We had an election, dead, right? And they're going to be dead for the next 3.5 years. So at the same time, and around that same time, California said, well, SEC, you're not moving fast enough. We're going to do this too, right? So California published their own rules. Part of that rulemaking or part of that, rulemaking got challenged in court and is still kind of held up in court. We were one of the companies, we prepared for it. We did our climate scenario analysis and planning, and we went ahead and submitted because I said, I'm not going to wait for the courts to hash this out. We already did it. We already published it in our annual sustainability report. Why wouldn't I just submit it to the state of California, right? And we've got that upcoming deadline now for scope 1 and 2 emissions to report to California, in August of this year, right? So prepping for that, making sure that our numbers are ready to go in. I'm fortunate. We're primarily North America based. Our operations outside of the U.S. aren't large enough to trigger CSRD in Europe, but CSRD has been another one where the legislation was moving, companies were getting ready for it. And then you have this scattered framework in Europe where every country kind of takes their own direction on it, right? So I think being in this space for over 15 years, I hoped and prayed for the day we would come to a standardized reporting. When investors woke up, I thought, yes, we're going to get there. And we are nowhere near it today, right? So all of you who are teams of one out there, I sympathize with you. I'm a team of one with one lowly intern who works her butt off for me. But it's how do you make those tough decisions on what's important and what's not? And how do you tackle everything coming at you, right? Because if I go to my boss and ask to add staff at this point, he's going to say, figure it out. And that's kind of where we are.
So it's the fall of federal regulation, or what might have been a cohesive framework, maybe, but also still the state level is still there, if not rising. I think that's the same for extended producer responsibility, right? EPR, which there's state level regulations. We actually in the electronic space and in Canada have done EPR for many years. I think it's a lot more mature there. We've seen a little bit of change on the provincial level in Ontario, where we're largely based. It's moved to an outcomes based EPR approach, where it's not just a single system that you have to report to, but you are responsible for outcomes. There's approved PROs, producer responsibility organizations. You can choose who you want to work with. And we've actually seen that's worked really well. But here in the US, and especially on the packaging side, and I think this was touched in the previous panel to here, it's very different state by state. Eric, you're in Oregon.
Yep.
And Oregon's been a state where
they're ahead of most states in terms of when they pass the bill and where they are in terms of implementation, although some of it is getting held up in the courts as well. From just the Radius side, we do very little packaging of, we buy some bales of metal that will post-consumer packaging that will make it to our steel mill. So it's, other than just a administrative burden to us, it's not been too impactful. But I think what we're seeing, not just in Oregon, but in California and in other states where we're operating at, and it's, folks are getting a little frustrated with EPR because the original intent, at least from the industry side, was, all right, there are products out there that are super challenging to recycle, that the value of that product's not pulling it through the system. So there needs to be an EPR program in place to deal with those products. Paint's a good example. Mattresses have been a good example. Honestly, film plastic was the one that really touched things off in California. Unfortunately, through that legislative process, I think honestly, a lot of it came from the plastics industry. They wanted it to be material neutral. So then EPR went from dealing with very hard specific problems to handling all of packaging or all of material. And you have healthy markets that are represented by companies at ReMA that, the material's getting pulled through the system by the marketplace, by the value. And there are regulations in place to do it responsibly. And the concern is, well, you bring in an EPR system, you're going to completely throw the baby out with the bathwater, create flow control, pick winners and losers. And, companies have built their businesses on it. So admittedly, there's a lot of frustration on how it's getting rolled out.
Yeah. What advice would you give, especially to companies that are maybe earlier stage in this, just gearing up for it? Any advice on how to deal with this EPR, prepare for it? Based on your experience?
Strength in numbers. So organizations like ReMA are going to be helpful in terms of advocacy. I think really a lot of the concern, and this is where companies really need to, as long as they're doing things correctly and by the letter of the regulation, it becomes an enforcement issue a lot of the times where states or local jurisdictions are looking at EPR to solve all for a very specific violator of how an operation's going. And instead of dealing with that from an enforcement side, they think they can deal with it from a policy side, which you agree with or don't agree with it. That's, I would just say work with other industry peers and really narrow that conversation to try to figure out what the outcome is or what the problem is.
Right. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about other aspects, other things that the companies may be talking about and thinking about besides regulation. Kitsie, you help companies on a broad range of topics. What are you seeing them look at, like other types of risks that especially sustainability can help with?
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing and what advice are you giving them?
Well, I think unfortunately, I think all of the sustainability risk, I'm not sure sustainability is not creating more risk at the moment because of regulation and because of the anti-ESG sentiment. So for instance, communication is now seen as a risk. I have had lots of conversations with legal staff at lots of companies in the last 2 years about why, it's not worth the risk of saying something in a report or making statements or, there used to be no such thing as over communicating. Mm. And now, for the first time in my communications career, which is a really interesting dynamic, I think risk on the ESG side or the sustainability side, obviously physical risk on the balance sheet in terms of assets. Interestingly, for all the communication, you still pick up a 10K, and climate risk, particularly, for assets is, right there. It hasn't gone away no matter what. The risk of, I think there's a lot of risk associated with, again, the sort of unequal U.S. outside the U.S. not only reporting and regulation, but just the overall sentiment. If you operate in the EU, you've got to talk out of one side of your mouth. And then if you, depending on how visible or, maybe not so much for B2B space, but in the U.S., you've got to temper your comments. So that creates a lot of different types of risk to handle. Our best advice in all of this is to constantly, when it comes to your sustainability initiatives, to your sustainability story, to align it as closely as you can with business, with the economics. Because that then makes it sound business management. It does not make it, sort of a do-good, bleeding heart. We're not talking about doing better for tomorrow. We're talking about doing better for the business, making the business stronger, more competitive, so on and so forth. If you can frame it, and I think a lot of companies are still struggling with that. If you can frame it and talk about it through the business lens, then it really helps mitigate a lot of the, again, the comms risk and regulatory risk that we're now facing.
Yeah. Align with the business lens. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. I guess there's other stakeholders out there and there's other things besides the regulatory side. There's customers to think about. That's on the market side. There's also the community to think about as well. And especially for certain types of businesses, they're very dependent on having good relationships with the community. Eric,
yeah.
I know for Radius, you're an example of that. You have.
They are. So, it's a strange thing because on one side, we're the center of the circular economy. We're recycling everything we touch. It's a great story, great sustainability story. At the same time, nobody wants to live next to a metal shredder, right? So call it, making sure you have that social license to operate, which means you're not only the end goal of your company and everything you're doing for the global sustainability efforts. The carbon intensity of recycled metal versus virgin material, all that stuff is great. But at the same time, you got to operate in a way that folks across the street from you don't know that you're there, or because no matter how great you're doing for the globe, they care about what's coming across the fence line, and rightfully so. So there's, it's almost like you have to have two different communication strategies. It's the product is really irrelevant to your neighbors. It's really about what are you doing to invest in the community? What are you doing to invest in your technologies and your air emissions control systems, your stormwater or your fence line monitoring, all that stuff. That's really what a lot of our companies are now having to deal with most of the time. And it's a sustainability message, but it's also, again, we're operating in a marketplace where not everybody's doing the same thing. So it becomes hard to implement when every dollar you're taking away from the buy side of your product is going to something that maybe your competitor's not putting that money into. So that's the challenge a lot of us face.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I want to come back to the communication strategy in a moment, but first I want to talk about another really important stakeholder, which is customer. Nicole, what are you seeing right now in terms of what customers are asking you or expecting of ADS?
Yeah. So we sell in the building and construction market, right? And I'll be honest, the building and construction market was kind of lagging on sustainability related issues. So since I joined 5 years ago, when I joined 5 years ago, I had our VP of sales literally tell me, I don't understand why we need your position. Our customers don't care about what you do. Right. And I've got thick skin. I've been doing this for long enough that I said, well, I disagree. I respectfully disagree. And I think you're going to see, right? Fast forward 5 years. And now I would say we get dozens of sustainability related requests from customers. Now there's a certain subset of those customers, right? So these are companies that are in the top 10% and have set net zero targets for greenhouse gas emissions. They're trying to eliminate concrete. We replace concrete pipe in those situations with a lower carbon footprint. And also there are government drives in certain states that basically incentivize the use of materials with recycled content, right? So LEED certification for buildings incentivizes that. So primarily we get requests for the carbon footprint or life cycle assessment or environmental product declarations and recycled content in our products. The other thing we started to get more of is more transparency on what materials our products are made of, right? Because I've heard plastic a lot of times, and I use plastic, but customers want to know, well, what kind of plastic do you use for your products, right? And primarily we're using high density polyethylene and polypropylene, which are easily recyclable at end of life. I will say in 100% transparency, we also make some of our products from PVC because of the structural characteristics of that. And PVC is really hard. It's one of the hard to recycle plastics, right? So Eric was talking about the good actors and the bad actors. I think when we look at plastics, some plastics are easily recyclable. And I know those of you out in this audience probably know that, and others are a little more difficult. And then we have films, right? So it's that constant challenge. And we are seeing those requests for information increase. But again, it's not all of our customers, and it kind of ebbs and flows with the economy as well.
Yeah, I would say at Quantum, we've seen our requests for information only increase over time. Our core customers are larger, enterprise level companies who want to know more about, responsible recycling of electronics. The other thing though we're seeing is they're looking for data to back up what they're doing with us in terms of the reuse and recycling. And they also now want more help. It's almost around the storytelling aspect. Like, we know we're doing a great thing when we give our electronics to you. We have the data to show it. Help us tell that story. So, tomorrow morning, I'm giving, we call it a Q talk, which is basically an educational talk, for customers. I'm giving one to 100 environmental coordinators at one of our major telecom customers. Next week, we're giving a talk to 400 government leaders because they want to tell this story and they want help telling that story. Which is a good segue back to communication. We talked about communication. Eric, you mentioned having different communication strategies for different types of audiences. Kitsie, this is what you do around communications. How are you advising companies to communicate these days? And I guess, is this whole like green hushing real? I think you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's real. Yeah, I can tell you it's real based on our financial results right now. Again, it kind of goes back to framing that's the story around business value. And in some cases that may force you to look at some of the things you do and reassess them in terms of, are they truly material to the business? If you're a financial services firm, and which I don't think anybody in the room is, but if you have a water goal, I mean, at the end of the day, chances are that your water impact is negligible, but maybe you made a goal 5 years ago because all your peers were, and everybody had to have a water goal. I mean, that's just, it doesn't make any sense. You're not going to get anybody to sign off on, water initiatives if it's not impacting the business. So I think not only from how you communicate, but also what you're doing, make it that there's a buzz phrase flying around. It's not about morality. It's about materiality. Mm-hmm. And, trying to, again, talk about being a responsible business and how being a responsible business mitigates risk, helps your bottom, drive top line in some instances. And, helps you in things like being, an employer of choice or retaining talent. Talk about how much it costs to churn through talent. There are ways to do it, but it takes some creativity too. Mm-hmm. Not everybody's sustainability strategy fits into a financial return equation.
Yeah. Fair enough. Nicole, what about you? Has your communication strategy changed much at ADS?
So, I mean, it's so ingrained in our brand that it really hasn't changed. I will say there are more opportunities, right? We see opportunities every day as we continue to build our safety culture. That has helped with our messaging with employees and future employees, right? I think when you talk about stakeholders, we make it a point to reach out to our stakeholders at least once every 3 years, but usually a lot more often than that. I'm touching base with them to say, what's important to you? Because we live in this microcosm that becomes an echo chamber of what we think is important. And I like to think that I'm pretty knowledgeable about what I do, having done it for this many years, but occasionally I'll get a question from one of them and I'll be like, we really haven't thought about that and maybe we should dig in. And sometimes you dig in and you come to the point and you say, this really isn't material to us, but until you've looked at it, you don't know that. But I like to say we can't boil the ocean, right? When people ask you, well, why, our two main targets are to get to 1 billion pounds a year recycled material and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in line with our science-based targets. So that's a 50.4% reduction on scope 1 and 2 by 2032 and a 30% reduction on scope 3, category 1, which is basically the resin that we buy. And why is that important? Because if we focus on those two and achieve those two, we'll make a bigger impact than if I was focusing across 12 different initiatives that might not go anywhere. And I think in this current environment, tying it back to that economic piece, energy prices, I don't know where you all live. Where I live in Ohio, data centers are going up like crazy so fast that literally there is a petition out there to ban building any more data centers in the entire state of Ohio, right? Because they're having impacts. They're starting to operate. And I think, they want to it's not that people don't want them. It's that we want a coordinated approach to how they're built and to how they're regulated and to how that all ties in. And what's that doing? Energy prices are going up, right? So if you can make a business case anywhere, energy efficiency today, if you go out there and have an energy assessment, we have 69 manufacturing facilities across the U.S. And in those really high cost areas and where the cost is increasing the fastest, we're going in and doing energy assessments so that we can, and it has nothing to do with my sustainability goals, right? It's all about saving money. I've actually partnered with our lean team and said, you guys want initiatives to save money. You're chasing after waste and this and that. That's great, but energy is more cost intensive than any of those. So let's go after, where the money is.
Yeah. Energy efficiency should save you money. As you were talking, it reminded me of, we just redid our materiality assessment this past year. Materiality assessment is a process by which you look at what is significant to your business. And then for us, that's shaped our goals that we set, what we report on. And it's interesting because a lot of it was the same from the 3 years prior that we did, but there were a few things that changed because the world has changed. Mm-hmm. And there was more on data security that rose to the top.
Yeah.
Eric, I'm curious, you've gone through the process from being a public company to now being a private company.
Well, a subsidiary of a publicly traded company in Tokyo.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how has your communication strategy changed?
Sure. So, every year with CRI's help, we'd put out an annual sustainability report on our goals. I would say that what had changed, and I wouldn't call it greenwashing, is I think our goals became less aspirational and obviously more science-based, but also I think the SEC ruling was weighing on folks' heads where really anything that wasn't, just a factor figure, we were having a hard time, from a risk standpoint, putting it out there any further. Anyway, so we had our goals. We had a great story to tell. I think that was partially what made us attractive on the sale. Got bought by Toyota Tsusho, and we now just fold into the internal reporting of Toyota Tsusho in Japan and trying to align with their goals. So it's definitely simplified our communication strategy when it comes to sustainability. So my advice to everybody in this audience is sell your company a Toyota Tsusho.
Very easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Box checked. So I've heard a lot about goal setting and some progress towards that. Kitsie, for companies that might be earlier stage on that journey of setting targets, setting goals, what is your advice to them? And especially to how to avoid like overcommitting to sustainability targets these days?
I always think of setting goals as sort of a Goldilocks dilemma. You know, you don't want to be too hot, too cold. You want to find just right. And that's really hard to do. That being said, I think when you see a company that sets a 10-year goal and they achieve it in year one is a bit disingenuous. And then what's really, and then they continue to report on it, even though they haven't reached the terminal year, but you know, they achieved it years ago. That doesn't really hold water. On the other hand, I totally understand why setting a goal 10 years from now, you have no idea what's going to happen. You didn't know a pandemic was going to happen. You didn't know the Straits of Hormuz was going to happen. You didn't know AI was going to happen, and you set emissions and energy targets, and all of a sudden you're a major, you know, your energy use has skyrocketed, and those goals are just absolutely unachievable given the current state. A lot of consumer products companies who have packaging goals, we've dealt a lot over the last year, 2030 goals, 2025 midpoint, and they're not making any progress because the innovation hasn't materialized. It's cost prohibitive. The innovation materialized, but it wasn't scalable. Consumers didn't accept it, so on and so forth. I mean, that's the name, you know, that's life and that's business. So that's, you know, obviously can keep you up at night. I still think that you should err on the side of a loftier goal. You know, aim high, try hard, and be honest. I mean, if you don't make it, I haven't yet to see a company completely, you know, go out of business because they didn't hit their energy goal target. I think, yes, you want to be careful about it and you want to be prudent, but it's just usually not that big a deal. I think I think people care more about the reaction almost internally than they do, than the true reaction externally.
Yeah, that makes sense. So set an ambitious goal and be honest in terms of your
this
journey.
is hard to do. We thought this was going to happen. It's not. We need to recalibrate.
Yeah.
And there are no rules against that.
Yeah, for sure. So a big audience in terms of making progress on goals, meeting goals, is working with your suppliers and your supply chain. We were joking before we came on here about procurement and the important role that procurement plays in all of this. Nicole, how are you engaging your suppliers around sustainability these days? And what are you asking them to do?
Yeah, so I think we started out going out to our suppliers, and then just to frame this up for you, we buy about 1 billion pounds of resin a year to make products, right? About half of that is recycled content typically, and half of it is virgin resin. To give you an idea of the fragmentation in recycling today, which you probably already know, we buy the recycled content from anywhere from 500 to 1,000 different suppliers. The same amount of virgin resin comes from 3 chemical companies. And we could buy it all from one if we wanted to, right? We do 3 just to keep it in the mix. So procurement is one of my best partners as we journey forward to meet not only our recycled content goals, but also our greenhouse gas emissions reduction and decarbonization goals. So we started by just approaching some of our suppliers and sharing our story, and what they found when procurement started inviting me to the meetings. We had quite a few recycled material suppliers who had no idea what we did with their material. And once they found out that we were using it to make stormwater pipe that helps communities prepare for and recover from these increasingly frequent and intense storm events, they really wanted to be able to share that story. So we've helped quite a few of our suppliers share that story, right? And that's been productive for us in building those relationships. On the flip side, I've started reaching out to some of our suppliers, starting with the chemical companies, cause it was an easier lift to really start to get real life cycle, analysis and environmental product declaration data in. And why? Because we have a scope 3 target to reduce our scope 3 emissions by 30%. What does that mean? That's primarily coming from the resin that we buy. So we need real data. If I go out there and I use spend data to estimate that, I'll give a real example. This happened the second year I was in my role. Resin prices went up drastically year over year. We bought about the same amount of material and our scope 3 emissions nearly doubled. So my CEO's reading the sustainability report, scanning it for details that alarm him. And he says, what happened? How can this be? And I said, well, resin prices doubled, so our emissions doubled. And he says, but that's not real. And I said, I understand it's not real, but it's the best way I had to calculate it at the time, right? So refining that data will help us get real data. And let's be honest. I mean, if everybody was doing scope 1 and 2 emissions, we wouldn't need scope 3, but because there are companies out there who still don't have their scope 1 and 2, scope 3 is a necessity. It's a painful necessity, but it's a necessity. So just helping and where we can, I mean, the software we use to track our scope 3 emissions allows our suppliers to go in, upload their utility bills, and basically it calculates the emissions for them. So when we're going out to suppliers to say, hey, we need your data, it's not, oh, I need you to become an expert on the greenhouse gas protocol and calculate these scope 1 and 2 emissions and then send them to me. It's upload your utility bills to this third party. The platform will do the counts for you. Then I have confidence that the right emission factors and everything we're using, the data we're getting back's good. And the lift they have is procuring them 12 months worth of bills and uploading them to a platform.
Okay. To use a platform, and to help you manage that. I feel like at Quantum, it's like Q2. Q2 is when we get all the requests from our suppliers that we need this information. We need you to fill out all these forms. It can be a lot of work for someone. Kitsie, do you have any suggestions on how companies can manage these customers' requests and be efficient really around answering them?
Yes and no. Customer requests drive a lot of sustainability reporting. And I would say I feel like it's grown in the last couple of years, and it may just be because I think investor pressure is backed off a little bit. But, to give you an example, I mentioned we have, for the first time, we've been around more than 40 years, and we actually have a surprising number of private companies that we're working with now. And it's all being driven by their need to satisfy customers. Mm-hmm. We are working with a, very small, I think they have 1,000 employees, private engineering firm. And they have no sustainability function. They don't really need one. They have, they're a service company. They don't have a big impact. They're B2B, so on and so forth. But they are trying to do business with AstraZeneca. They're trying to do business with Volvo. And they came to us and said, do you know what EcoVadis is? And we have to, have an EcoVadis score, and it has to be this good. So we're helping them do that. And it's painful and it's costly. Hopefully once they build the infrastructure, and the reporting systems, it will get easier over time. As you've, said, I think that, in some respects, your sustainability report is supposed to be that efficiency mechanism. Look on page 16, look on page 16, look on page 16. But that doesn't always cut it anymore. And it also doesn't cut it if you are pulling back on your disclosure. So kind of to what you said earlier, I think we may ultimately end up where the sort of one size fits all sustainability report may have to end up being a much more, you're going to have tailored communications to various stakeholders. And the one thing about customer surveys, they're not generally the information is, you're providing it to your customer or a supplier or whatever, and it's not being put, on a website. So that does make it a little bit more palatable for teams and management and legal staff and so on and so forth. But I don't think there's a magic bullet.
Okay.
And I know I have more than one client that has a dedicated customer sustainability. That's all they do. Surveys and meetings.
When I was in the chemicals industry, I had 2 people on my team.
Yeah.
That's all they did.
Yeah.
Wow. We've come up with a master answer key for like the common questions we get asked. Here's our common questions, and then we can tweak them.
Yeah.
Based on, what's needed.
But it's kind of no different. I mean, we fill out RFPs and we've kind of got our archive of answers and, but you always got to tweak it.
Yeah.
And it's just the price to play.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about before we get into our lightning round, is really sustainability strategy coming to life. So we've got, all these goals, we've got strategy, but like, what does it actually show up like in practice? Eric, I know one of Radius's sustainability principles is technology and innovation. So what does that mean, and what innovations have you deployed?
Sure. So on the sort of social license to operate side, we've deployed regenerative thermal oxidizers at a number of our shredders, brought down our scope 1 emissions, our VOC emissions at our sites. We've electrified a lot of our fleet, our cranes. And then on the technology side, on the recycling side, we've have a number of technology implementations over the last couple of years. Sort of, we call it advanced metals recycling, where we're pulling more non-ferrous material out of the aggregate after we shred our material. So we're just putting more material back into the circular economy than we ever have before.
Yeah. Well, we've just installed a plastic float sink system in our Toronto recycling facility, which will help us to recover more plastics. Another really cool innovation we have is a battery sorter, which sorts based on chemistries and uses AI. So lots of cool innovations out there. Nicole, the one thing I wanted to ask you about is ADS seems very forward thinking around how you're preparing for extreme weather, because it's happening. The weather is changing. We have extreme weather events. That's the new norm. So what is ADS doing to prepare for that?
Yeah. So we went through climate scenario analysis in the past year and developed our climate adaptation and resilience plan. And basically what that did is it forced us to look at our manufacturing network, where our plants are located, and looked at things like, where are we going to see increasing heat stress, right? Because we operate extrusion equipment in non-air conditioned buildings, right? With workforce that is exposed to the elements year round. And usually you walk in the winter and it's warm in there because the process is so exothermic. You walk in the summer and you wish you weren't in there because the process is so exothermic and we're using fans to get that out. So looking at the infrastructure and saying, where do we need to deploy additional resources to make sure we can ensure the health and safety of our employees? And then also looking at our supply chain, right? So we've seen several supply chain ripples already because, 50% of our resin comes from the Gulf, right? And when there's a hurricane or an ice storm that takes down the grid because Texas believes that they are more important than everybody else and they have their own grid, that sends ripples through our business, right? So, procurement can plan for those events, but again, there's a war, people dropping bombs, that also has an impact. So it's made us more agile and more ready for things like that. So, with everything going on in the Middle East, a lot of people would say, well, you buy your resin from the US. How's that affected you? And it's that whole interconnectedness of the global supply chain, right? Because why are they going to sell it to us when they can sell it for more someplace else because of this disruption? So really helping the business to really become more agile around that has been another advantage of that planning. And then also looking at, as we build out new facilities and as these, climate events are increasing, where is that going to happen? Where are our target markets? Because ironically, we're fighting against climate change, but climate change is really good for our business, right? And that's hard for me as a sustainability professional to say, but it is. So it's part of the sales and marketing strategy too, is looking at, where are these events going to occur? And I can tell you 3 of our biggest states, for sales, California, Florida, and Texas. Right? And that really doesn't shock anybody.
Thank you for being honest about that. And yeah, I can understand. It might be a hard thing to say, but it's the reality. Climate change is creating opportunities for certain businesses. Okay. Let's move into our lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a question and you can answer ideally short. Nicole, I'm going to start with you. A recent win.
Oh, I built an AI chatbot to respond to customer requests for my email, and it works.
Really? I can see that about you.
I think you may hear AI a lot here. Yeah, we've been struck. Well, you're going to ask about a challenge, I know. So, but yeah, we've used AI, cautiously and have had a couple of instances lately where we've used it for some analytics, and it has saved time, but more than anything, I think it's made us more effective in the advice and the, services that we're providing to our clients. We've had more time to be thoughtful with somebody else doing the, ditch digging of research. And, so that's felt like a win.
Yeah, fair enough. Eric?
I think, the first 6 months of the integration with Toyota has been a win. It's going well, going really well.
That's great. And then on our side, we haven't really talked about employee engagement yet. We leverage sustainability for a lot of employee engagement initiatives. We have our Earth Week challenge coming up next week, which is a competition between our sites. We did a circular challenge last October, which is Circular Economy Month. And we had a huge participation in that, where our employees shared their circular wins. So yeah, I'm proud of that. Okay, Kitsie, this one's for you. A challenge you're currently tackling.
Well, there's 2 sides to everything, and particularly AI. As much as I think it can help us, I think as a small business, an investment in AI, making sure we get it right is huge and can be, a really bad mistake could be really bad for our business. So trying to figure out where it makes sense, where it actually adds value to us and our clients, and where it's just hype. And I do feel like there have been some cases where you're being asked to use AI just for the sake of using AI, to say you did it. Sure. And so, that is a challenge right now. I think that's a challenge everywhere, but particularly in our business.
Yeah, fair enough.
Lithium-ion batteries, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. There's a marketplace that we have folks that are doing great work on bringing that material back into the circular economy. At the same time, it's still probably our number 1 safety risk at our sites for our employees. So making sure that we manage both correctly has been the challenge.
Nicole?
So I'm fortunate to be in a company that's growing like crazy. I'm also unfortunate to be in a company that's growing like crazy. So we've acquired enough companies now that I have to re-baseline our science-based targets this year. I'm completely not looking forward to that.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So did I.
A trend you're excited about, Eric?
Trend I'm excited about. I would say it's the, and we just talked about it in the metals market today, which is just the reshoring of manufacturing here. I think that'll make a lot of the stories that we're trying to tell successfully easier, once we have our customers closer to us than where they are right now.
Well, it's been a tough year to get excited in the sustainability space. But I would say within our company, I'm really excited about the energy behind energy efficiency, right? The fact that there's more engagement, in our manufacturing network around that.
Yeah. Kitsie?
I mentioned earlier that I thought, even as painful as this reset moment is for sustainability, I do think that forcing ourselves to think think differently, maybe think about our audiences more and framing, our stories in terms that they understand is ultimately going to be a positive. And, it's going to, rather than just sort of talking to somebody who may not understand sustainability at your company and saying, oh, they just don't get it, or my CEO just doesn't get it, or whatever, challenging yourself to really go in and frame the story in their terms. And, it may not be the story that you want to tell, but ultimately it may get you farther. And I think that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just to build on that, I'm excited that we're seeing with a lot of our customers, they want help telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
They want us to come and speak to their staff. And I think that's a really good thing all around. Okay. Last one. Now, the last question of the podcast, the Circular Future that we always do is, what's one last piece of advice you'd leave the listeners with? We've covered a lot today. We knew we were going to. What would be one last piece of advice you would leave the audience with today? And Nicole.
So my piece of advice would be, this is a tough space to be in. Be optimistic. Be optimistic and don't get discouraged, right? Because someday that no's going to turn to a yes.
Don't forget how fast progress can be reversed. Not to be Debbie Downer, but
Mine would lean into your network, ask questions. That's usually where I figure things out.
Yeah. And mine would be, ReMA has a lot of great resources. There's a toolkit, an ESG toolkit that has a lot of amazing resources in it where you do not have to reinvent the wheel. Leverage that. It's available on the website. Thank you so much. I think a lot of good nuggets here. I know I took away a lot. I think my favorite, you summed it up really nicely, Kitsie, when you said it's not so much about morality, it's about materiality. And if anything, I think that's the state of sustainability today. So thank you so much for all of your insight and all you've contributed. Now, we have a little bit of time for questions. I invite you to come to the mic if anyone is interested. While we wait for that, not awkwardly, just a few announcements. A reminder that after this, we're doing a meetup in the member lounge for ReMA members. If you're interested in sustainability, and invite you to come out. It's on till 5. We also do have the Sustainability Network at ReMA. Again, you're welcome to join as a member. We have every other month calls now where we get to network. There's also webinars. And finally, tomorrow morning at 10, and Jason's still here, Jason from Tetra Pak over there. We're doing a live podcast recording down at the live stage at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. And you can hear Tetra Pak's story, especially around recycling and the collaborations they're doing around recycling. No questions? Okay.
By default. Maybe. Yes.
Hi.
No.
Yep.
So it seems like a lot of the time, even if you make 2 or 3 or 4 steps forward, any setback is what is focused on in the press and people grasp onto, and it's used as a way to invalidate like real progress that's being made. What have you all done in the past to sort of tell your authentic story of the good things that are happening while also recognizing unforeseen setbacks due to, external factors or things like that?
Great question.
So I think I have a good example of that, right? I'm working to decarbonize a company that has a fleet of 700 trucks, one of the largest trucking fleets in North America, right? And none of the EV solutions work for us because the way our network is set up, we have to deliver within a 250-mile radius. And unlike warehouse to warehouse, we're delivering to a GPS pinpoint in a farmer's field or on a construction site where there's no plug for me to plug them back in, right? So we've been very transparent about that journey and the reason, because I get questions all the time. Well, why aren't you putting EVs into your fleet of trucks? And I'm like, well, because an EV can't do what we need it to do today. So we're continuing to follow that and looking at hydrogen economy and what the next evolution is going to bring, right? And I would say I get some of the most positive feedback from that, even though there's some naysayers who say you should be trying to do it anyway, right? But then there's also some positive feedback from that of saying, we appreciate that you're transparent, that you can't get there, right? And we're constantly watching out. The other reality of that is I don't think the general public always realizes that, I can't go to my CEO and say, can you buy me a fleet of trucks that costs 5x what your normal fleet would cost? Plus, on top of that, we need to install chargers at all of our facilities, right? And when we looked at building out our new plant, that's planned for Florida, we did look at that capacity and we had to put in extra electrical transformers to be able to be ready for that future point, right? So I think it's about transparency and it's about weathering that storm and it's about telling the entire story, not just, oh, we didn't get there, right? And I will tell you, our board worries a lot about that. With our £1 billion goal, we're midpoint to our goal, to our deadline of fiscal 32, and the board is constantly asking me, we're at midpoint, let's reevaluate, maybe recalibrate, because they're afraid that we're not going to get there. And what are the repercussions of that, right? As we've seen, typically, I think Kitsie mentioned they're not super negative. So I would rather keep that big, hairy, audacious goal out there. And then if we don't get there, we explain it, right? That there's a juxtaposition between capitalism and sustainability, and capitalism's going to win.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think so. I think that one of the problems with sustainability over the years has been, and not to take anything away from idealism, but you work for a business, and corporate sustainability is inherently about profitability. And so you've got to be realistic. The other word that you mentioned was context. I think don't assume people know what you know. Even if you explained it 50 times, even if it's been in your sustainability report every year since the beginning of time, people are not, they're not tuned in. They're in their own world. You've got to tell them again. You've got to explain the nuances. Yeah, which is all about being transparent.
Yep. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you soon.